So recently I was able to obtain this very nice dual 502 turntable from a very nice gentleman for free because it had a serious problem that was going to be difficult to fix. So that sounded like a challenge at the right price. So then, a few days later, I seemingly miraculously saw an ad for another of the exact same turntable that seemed to have many, if not all, the parts that I needed. So what could possibly go wrong? So while the second turntable looked great in the pictures and seemed to have exactly what I needed, in fact, it had exactly the same problem as the first one, which was the tone arm. So in doing some reading, it turns out that the tone arm carrier here is prone to fail on this model of dual turntable, and both had exactly the same failure. So if you look, when I move the tone arm, that's not right. Right? So what actually happened is this shaft here sheared off from the yoke, and that's made of plastic. So I looked around, and there are a lot of dual parts, new old stock parts available, but not this part. I assume that they all broke years ago and then were all replaced with the new old stock parts, and now none of them are available. And those parts weren't very good in the first place. So now I have 2 turntables and 0 tone arms. So I'm going to remove the tone arm from this turntable. So first I need to remove the platter. So there's a little screw here that you loosen and slide this catch to the left, and then the platter will lift off, and this is a very nice heavy cast aluminum platter. And there are 3 screws at the base of the tone arm, 2 here and 1 in the back. So on the bottom, I'm going to release this lifting arm to get it out of the way. So I'm going to push this cam down and turn it. It's going to pop up, and there's a little spring in there too. I'm making a video, but take lots of pictures before you take something like this apart. And this should lift away to give me access to here. So now I need to remove these 2 nuts, which is a 5.5 millimeter wrench. Okay, so now I need to remove this central nut. So to access it, I'm going to turn the anti-skate knob to get that lever out of the way and use a 7 millimeter socket on that. Okay, with that done, all that's left is to detach the tone arm wires. So normally they would be soldered on over here, but that's already been done for me by somebody. So all I'm going to have to do is remove this tape and pull the tone arm out the top, which miraculously is still good after all these years. And here is the offending article. So I'm just going to remove this trim plate here. Okay, so you can see that it mounts by these 3 screws here, which looks like the 2 outer ones are slightly longer than the one in the middle. So many dual turntables use similar parts, so I'm hoping that I can find an arm from a similar turntable that was not prone to failure like this and swap it out. So let's look for a tone arm. So I did a search on eBay for dual turntable tone arm. Price, shipping, highest to lowest. Skip all of these things until we get to some tone arms. Okay. So if we look at these, it seems like a lot of them have only 2 lugs here. So I need one that also has a screw here in the middle to fix it to the plinth of the turntable. So you could search by part number or model number, but I'm going to just try doing this visually first to see what is actually available out there. Something like this, for example, looks like it might fit the bill. So I decided to buy this one because it was a little less expensive than some of the other ones, and it looks like it might be what I need. So we look at it here. It has the 3 lugs, although, well, the middle one is a little shorter on the one that I have. These look like they might be longer, but it seems like we're in the right ballpark here. And this is from a much better turntable, actually at 1245. So if this will work, it will actually be a significant upgrade from the Tonearm that I already have, which of course doesn't work. So here I have my new Tonearm, and it is very similar to the old one, but not the same. So the biggest difference, as I suspected, is in the length of these legs. So I was hoping that I would be able to take parts from the old one and graft them onto the new one to make it fit. So this is the yoke that goes over the top, and this is this piece right here. But that appears to not be feasible. So the way that this mounts here is different on both of these. And the height of this is different than the height of the one on the new Tonearm. So I don't think that's going to work. So the problem is that these are going to extend too far down below the base of the turntable and foul everything up. Now, if I can't make these shorter by replacing it with a different part, is there any way I could move the Tonearm up and effectively achieve the same thing? So in examining the turntable, it seems like there's a little bit of leeway on this one here, so I might be able to get a little bit of float on that plate that these bolt into. But this distance here, will sit on the plinth of the turntable, to here is the problem. So if I measure the original one, that looks like it's about 20 millimeters. And if I measure the replacement one, looks like that is about 24 millimeters. It's a little hard to see from this angle. So if I could jack this up by 4 millimeters, I might be able to get it to fit. So I don't have anything handy to use as a spacer that's 4 millimeters thick. I do have something that's 2 millimeters, which is this styrene plastic that's used for modeling purposes. So if I did 2 layers of this, that should work. I think it'd also be a good idea to try 3D printing a part. Maybe that would be something for the future, but for now I want to try this and see if it'll work. So I figured out that I have 2 hole saws, so I need to make a ring because the parts need to go through the middle. So this larger hole saw is just about the right size for the outer part of it, and this smaller hole saw will take care of the middle. So I've clamped the styrene to a piece of wood and clamped the piece of wood to the table, but hanging over the edge so I don't drill through it into the table. So I'm going to drill the outer ring here. I'm going to do that off camera so I don't screw it up. So it's not exactly the work of a milling machine or a 3D printer, but that turned out pretty well. A little bit of filing, that should work fine. So I'm going to drill the inner hole using the same pilot hole right in the middle to make a ring. So this is difficult to clamp because I need to just clamp onto the outer edge of this that is going to remain after the hole is drilled. Okay, so that fits pretty well. So we're halfway there. Well, not quite. So I need to drill holes in the piece of plastic for the mounting holes here. And there's also a couple other things. So there's a little nub here. This is a screw coming in from the other side, which is going to protrude into the same area where the ring is. I'm going to have to drill out a hole for that to make some space for it. And there's also a little bump back here, so I'm going to have to file the underside of the ring to make it fit over that. And here we go. That seems to fit pretty well. So I need to make another one of these and drill holes in it and make a sandwich. So I have my 2 layers of plastic. So let's test fit this Tonearm. So I'm going to put the trim piece on first, and then lower the tone arm down. So I'm going to leave the tone arm wires out for now, but this goes in like this. So I'm going to line up the holes on the bottom and secure it from the bottom. So I've gently lowered the new tone arm in and loosely secured the 3 nuts here. And as of right now, everything seems to clear and be moving all right. So let's look at it from the top. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I've lined up the holes. I don't have quite the right screws yet. I have to get ones that are longer to extend through the bit that I just made and also that are countersunk. I have some things to work for now, so I'm going to tighten this down a little bit. So I have the tone arm temporarily secured, and let's see if this works. And it turns on the motor, and it feels like it's moving smoothly across the surface of what would be the record. It doesn't quite come all the way back to the armrest, but that's pretty good. So another issue with the tone arm is the damping. It's not going up and down as it should. So normally you move this lever here, and it actuates this device right here, which moves up and down. But it's kind of sticky, so I'm going to see if I can loosen it up by spraying some WD-40 in here. That looks a lot better. Now you can overdo it with the cleaning. So if you get all of the damping fluid out, it'll drop way too fast. But I think this seems to have worked okay. So to adjust the height that the stylus hovers over the record when the cueing lever is up, you turn this little orange thing here. This is threaded. Move it up and down to make it higher. You turn it counterclockwise and make it lower, turn it clockwise. So that seems like a big improvement. So I'm still having trouble with 2 things which seem to be interrelated. So one is the tone arm not moving all the way to the right onto the rest here. And the second has to do with the cueing. So right now I have it working well. So the cueing will go up and down at any point on the record. But according to the service manual, the position of that tone arm moving toward the rest is adjustable by loosening these 2 nuts. So I did confirm that the holes under here are somewhat eccentric, and when you loosen them, there is a little bit of play, and you can move it back and forth. But the problem is that when I adjust it so the tone arm moves all the way back to where it's supposed to be at rest, that this sort of plastic bit of the plunger that moves the tone arm up and down hangs up on the edge of this groove in this piece here. So that seems kind of strange because none of that is tone arm dependent. All those were parts of this turntable, not part of the tone arm that I got for it. So I'm not sure why that's happening, but right now I have it adjusted so the cueing will work, but the tone arm is not quite where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to service the motor now. It needs to drop out the bottom, so I'm going to remove this screw and then these 3 nuts using a 7mm wrench or socket. So I'm going to open the bottom of the motor by removing these 2 screws here. And the bearing cap simply comes off. To get to the top of the motor, I also need to remove this screw here. Now I can wiggle it out of the case. So to remove the motor pulley, I'm going to loosen these 2 grub screws here and here. So with those loosened, this will pull right off. And actually what works even better than Q-tips to get into really small spaces like this is, well, don't throw away your expired COVID tests, because these nasal swabs are sized perfectly. So this is the top bearing, but the bottom bearing also has this. So I've read that there is a felt wick underneath this cap that is going to absorb and hold oil to lubricate this for the future. So I'm going to fill this up with oil and let that sink in. Okay, so that's the top bearing. Reinsert that into the motor. Flipping it over, do the same with the lower bearing. I'm going to reinsert it into the case and then screw it back together. So I'm going to also clean this pulley inside and out before putting it back on. So you can see how the speed control on this motor works. So this AC motor turns at a constant speed, but what varies is the diameter of this pulley. This on top is 33, this is 45, and it varies because there is a screw on the top with a cone underneath it, and that cone, as it is screwed down, subtly widens or narrows the diameter of these pulleys. So this is done manually, so what you have to do is stop the turntable, hold this with your one hand, turn this with a screwdriver with the other, but it does seem to work pretty well for fine speed control, and the speed of the motor is so consistent that it's sort of a set it and forget it type of thing. So overall this works pretty well. So one of the things I should have done before I took the pulley off of its shaft was note its vertical position so I can put it back in the same place. So the belt comes through here, and the top part of this is the 33, so this piece shunts it to the top for 33 when the switch is moved, and this is for 45 in the middle here. But of course the vertical position of this matters because you want the belt to be properly centered on its pulley. So I've had to do some trial and error to try to get it in the right place again. So you can adjust the vertical position of this pulley by loosening and tightening the grub screws down here and moving it up and down. And you can do that even with the platter and belt installed. If you have a long enough screwdriver, you can reach it from underneath. So with some help from a slow motion camera, you can see that the belt looks pretty well centered now on that 33 pulley. And at 45, it looks good too. So the vertical position of that pulley looks okay now. So it's time to run a speed test. And that is just about dead on for 33. So that's not quite at 45. Now, I don't really think there's anything that can be done about this because, again, the motor is always turning at a constant speed, so it's just flipping between those two pulley positions. There's only one speed adjustment for that pulley, and if you want it to be right for one of them, it's probably 33. So I don't know if this is a fault or if this is just the way they are, but it seems like we're stuck at 44. So I have the Tonearm working pretty well. The motor is serviced, the speed looks great, but if I want the turntable to make some sound, I need to reconnect the signal cables. So one part that I've swapped over from the other turntable is this assembly here, where the RCA cables plug in. So on this turntable, before I remove the part, it had been completely broken off like this. So how could that happen? Well, the reason is because of these cables. So these are cables that probably sold by others too, but these were Radio Shack's high-end cables back in the 1980s, and they certainly looked the business. Nice thick cable, gold plate connectors. These are absolutely terrible. So what had happened was the RCA connectors, the jacks, were positively welded to these, and somebody tried to pull them out and broke them right off. So I've had similar experiences with other equipment. Every time I've used these, I've regretted it. I've actually ripped jacks right out the back of equipment because these fit so tight and actually seem to promote corrosion rather than prevent it. So if you have cables like this, unfortunately, just get rid of them. So this is the assembly again from the other turntable. It's all ready to go to solder those wires back on. So as you can see, it says right here. So this here is the positive for the right side. White is the positive for the left side. Green is the ground for the right side. Blue is the ground for the left side. And black is the Tonearm ground. So I'm still not happy with the position of this Tonearm. In fact, it's even a little bit worse than it was before. But again, I had to adjust it underneath so that that plunger would clear the metal piece and move up and down. So there may be more trial and error involved there, but it does seem to work. So I'm going to see finally if this turntable makes sounds. This is the first play of a record with this transplanted Tonearm. And it works. And it even picks up at the end of the record and shuts off. So now that I've been able to make the turntable make sound, now I can turn my attention to making it actually sound good. So the cartridge is mounted on a sled like this, which makes it easy to interchange. This is the cartridge that came with one of the turntables. It's a Pickering V15, which is basically the same as a Stanton 500. So this is a pretty good cartridge. I've had a number of these. I like them a lot. So the preferred stylus for this that I like is this Kiowa D5100E. So this track's pretty light at about 1.5 grams. It's an elliptical and it sounds great. So I think this would be a very good choice for this turntable and cartridge. So normally when I set up a cartridge, I skip the steps I'm about to do, and I just use my scale to set the tracking force. But duals are a little more sophisticated than your average turntable. So there's actually two things that you have to set. So first I'm going to set this tracking force dial to 0. I'm also going to turn the anti-skate to 0 for now as well. So with the lever in the down or play position, I'm going to adjust this knurled ring so that the Tonearm balances horizontally by itself without any intervention from me. So this is a little heavy, so I'm going to turn the weight counterclockwise to balance it out. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so the directions say now, what I do is I turn this knob back to the desired tracking force, and then I'm going to check it with a scale. Okay, so I've set the knob to 1.5. I'm going to move the Tonearm over, set it down, and wow, that is precision. So this was done completely without using the scale, and usually on most turntables when you do that, it's not right, but on this dual it is spot on. So I made sure that the turntable was level, and then I checked the alignment of the cartridge and the head shell with this alignment gauge, and surprisingly it was good. So this turntable has been aligned correctly for many, many years. So now I'm going to set the anti-skate So most cartridge manufacturers recommend a setting equal to the tracking force of the cartridge, and I've found that's not a bad place to start, so I'm going to set that at 1.5. I have a blank record with no grooves on it here, designed for this purpose. I'm going to start it up, put the stylus down. Alright, since it's moving to the outside, that means that there's too much anti-escape force applied. So I'm going to turn it down and try that again. It's still a little bit too much. Still a little bit too much. And again, the turntable should be level when you're doing this. Still a little too much. And that looks like it's just about right. So ended up with a value of about 1 on this scale. So I listened to a record all the way through, and I was pretty happy with what I was hearing from the stylus, but I think I hear some motor noise. So I'm going to use a stethoscope here on the plinth. And yes, I can definitely hear something at different places on the plinth. So this is, of course, with the belt installed and the platter turning. So now I have the belt off, so I'm going to start by spinning the platter by hand and see if I hear vibration. And I hear almost nothing, so it does not seem to be coming from the main bearing of the platter. So I've got the motor running, and if I drag the pulley a little bit, it doesn't really seem to change sound. If I stop it, it doesn't feel like there's any play in here. So it's not that the motor is wobbling or something, but it's just noisy. So I opened up the bottom bearing again, and this is the bearing from the motor that's being used, and this is the bearing from the other motor, and it looks a little bit better. There's a little bit of discoloration here on the bearing that was in use. So I think I'm going to try this one, and I have to say that sounds substantially better. It's now nearly quiet. So it's nice to have extra parts, so that bottom bearing from the motor, which was seemingly in worse condition, actually is working better. So each turntable came with a base, but I have only one cover. So there's this fake wood and plastic base, and there's the real wood base here from United Audio. So I believe that these wooden bases were actually made in the United States. United Audio is, or was, Dual's longtime importer, and I heard these bases were not that great, and I can understand what they meant. It's kind of flimsy. This is particle board here. It's kind of bending. So I'm not really that crazy about the real wood base, but I like the fake wood base surprisingly a little better. And actually the cover will fit equally well or poorly on both of these. So this cover, even if it was used on the other turntable, the other base, is not hinged. And as you can see, this cover is quite a bit taller than it needs to be, I think because it was probably intended for use with a changer. So this is all I've got, but I think I prefer this combination to the one with the taller wood base. So another reason to go with this base is that in addition to the turntable's spring-loaded suspension, it does have rubber feet on the bottom that absorb some vibration. And because the bottom is flat, there's also the option of installing additional ones like these domes I've used before. So I've just rested these underneath this turntable and tested it out, and these seem to be an improvement over the stock feet. So is this turntable done? Well, will it ever be? Could this video be any longer? So it's 48 years old, and I think like any old device, an old car is going to need continuous tweaking and maintenance to keep it working its best. But so far, this has been a remarkable transformation. I'm particularly pleased I was able to take an old broken Tonearm and replace it with what turned out to be Dual's top-of-the-line turntable Tonearm from that year, 1977, from their top-of-the-line idler drive. And this is the bottom of the line from that same year. So this is an incredibly well-engineered turntable. It was a pleasure to work on, and I'm sure it'll be a pleasure to listen to records on and play with and fix for years to come.